Hi, everyone. Good evening. Welcome to our tasting of Lusitanian Libations, exploring the history and wines of Western Iberia. This is our tasting for club number 35. Sorry for the slight delay. We're just having a little bit of technical difficulty getting everything set up here. We're really excited about this club. This is a topic we've been sort of tossing around for quite a long time, wanting to have the opportunity to work with Portuguese wine. So this is the first time I believe we've ever had Portuguese, even a Portuguese wine in the club. And here we have actually six, if you include the two special offer wines. So really excited. As some of you know, I have a little 10, I guess now 12-day-old baby in the room next door. So I may have to kind of bounce off the call here and there, but I'll still be here to turn the slides. And then, excuse me in advance if I have to do that. As usual, if you have questions, you can pop them in the chat, or we'll leave some time at the end to sort of go through any questions about the wine, about the content, anything you're interested in learning about that we can help you with this topic. So just kind of throw the questions down below or hold them to the end. So without further ado, we're gonna turn it over to T. Are you taking the first wine here? The Arinto. So we're gonna start right out. So what we did last time, we'll do this time as well, which is to introduce you to each of the four wines and then offer a little bit of content sort of from the write-up around the write-up for those of you who haven't had a chance to read yet, or who may be joining us and aren't yet full Ancient Wines Club members. So let me see if I can get the slide to go. There we go. All right, T, go for it.
Yeah, so the first wine, by the way, I've never been to Portugal. I don't think anyone of us have been to Portugal.
I've never been to Portugal.
No. Yeah,
This is why it's an upcoming destination, maybe.
Self-serving club here.
Yeah, absolutely. And we love Portuguese wines. They often fall a little bit under the radar. This first wine is from Óbidos. So it's, if you can see the map of Portugal, this is, if you know where Lisbon is right on like the coast. And this winery is about an hour-and-a-half drive north of Lisbon, so very easily accessible. It has a really nice diurnal shift because it's just a little bit inland between the Atlantic Ocean and the Monte Junto Mountains. So it gets that nice, just kind of like almost the Bay Area, where because of like the evening, the mountains pull in the cool oceanic breezes, and it gives it that beautiful Mediterranean diurnal shift. So the wines we have here is an Arinto, which is a Portuguese white variety. This winery is 4 generations old. They started in 1910. Right now it's 2 brothers who work on the winery, on the vineyards, and it is all organically farmed. And they like to say they like to listen to the vines and dance to the winds and the weather and let the vines express themselves. And so this is 1% organic production, native yeast, all that good stuff that we like. Stainless steel tanks. I get like a really pretty kind of like nice hint of white peach, lemon. There's a beautiful salinity to it, and that comes from the ocean breeze, just like the salinity you would find in an Alvarinho or something. And I think it would go super well with like any seafood fare, any grilled shrimp, brandade, which is like salt cod and potatoes whipped together, and like goat cheeses, etc.
Gorgeous. Yeah, this is really pretty. I really enjoy this.
Yeah, Arinto is definitely a grape that like I find like one of those entry point grapes for Portuguese people new to Portuguese, I should say, wine drinkers. Typically a lot of people's first experience of Portuguese white wine would be from like Vinho Verde, which is that kind of like lighter. Well, okay, I'll say what I'm about to say, and then I'm gonna actually correct myself. So it's that lighter sort of like spritzy, almost like kind of like lightly effervescent, maybe just like a prickle of CO2 white wine you'll see in tall green bottles. Technically, that's not the only way to make Vinho Verde, and that's actually That's actually Vinho Verde is the place. It's actually a region.
Yeah.
That this is just kind of a little bit of an aside on probably what's maybe the most common Portuguese wine in the market at the moment is this Vinho Verde. Arinto is one of the grapes that you'll see used in Vinho Verde up again north of Lisbon. And it's a grape that, again, like, you know, if you're using it in this kind of like lighter sort of, you know, like $5 at Trader Joe's kind of type of wine, a lot of times the grapes are heavily cropped for large volume, and you're not going to get a lot of variety, like varietal character of the grapes that are used. In this case, what I really liked about this wine is like it is very full of personality and character. Like this is something that is really showing a lot of that Arinto, you know, potential. So you get, you know, like T is saying, you know, those kind of like peaches, minerality, little salinity. That's something that, I mean, when you start finding these more serious, maybe I would say, I mean, not to like, you know, say that Vinho Verde is not a serious wine, but more serious expressions of Arinto. It's really fun. It really can kind of show like that nice middle ground for really balanced kind of textured white wine.
Yeah, and there's great minerality in it. I mean, it's grown on sandstone soils, steepy, hilly vineyards, kind of rolling vineyards.
It seems like you're saying that diurnal shift is really important because we're talking about a really hot part of
absolutely.
it.
Can get hot.
Can get hot. Yeah.
So without that kind of cooling, right, we'd be looking at something that's a very different animal.
Yeah.
It's kind of like how like in like what I would say like West County, like Sonoma, where it can get, you know, 105 in the day along the Russian River, but then at night you have fog that kind of blows in from the Sonoma coast and can cool things down. The farther west you go, the more there is. So I mean, you know, it can get, you know, on the central coast of California, it can get really hot, or on, you know, in you know, parts of like Columbia Valley of Washington, where, you know, you can have these big shifts in temperatures from, you know, from day to night. That really helps preserve that freshness, that minerality that he's talking about. So one of the things I also, this as an aside, love about this wine is like, for someone who enjoys blind tasting, I would have blind tasted this wine and guessed this wine was like a $75 like French Chenin Blanc in some cases. And I happen to really like Chenin Blancs, if you know anything about my wine palate. It has that kind of like stony, kind of quince, apple, pear, kind of peachy sort of thing going on. So when I first tasted it, you know, it scratched an itch for me on a personal level. So it was also just a fun wine that I'm glad we got to show off there. So.
It has great acidity too. I mean, for a wine, you know, not having had much Portuguese white wine, you know, there isn't Vinho Verde. Like I was really surprised with that. I was like, well, this is kind of, you know, tart and punchy in a good way. Like would go really well with food, I think. Like
I mean, just putting it in kind of like the spectrum of the other Portuguese white wines, for me, this falls like, again, kind of more in the middle, like pretty accessible, but still pretty vibrant. There are definitely some other Portuguese grapes that I would say go much more in the fruity spectrum, where you're getting like a lot of like really floral tones, a lot of very kind of almost like tropical elements to it. And then you have stuff that's almost, you know, kind of the opposite, where it can be very, very light, very kind of bony is the term I like to use sometimes, where you're like, wow, that's like barely there. So I think this plays a nice middle ground there. Well, Jeff, should we but I guess maybe before we jump on to the next wine, one thing I know that we kind of wanted to kind of do a little bit on for this you know, for these tastings, just to talk just a little bit about the, you know, the content in terms of like why we picked this club. Like I mean, we mentioned earlier, like this is kind of like the first Portuguese club that we're doing. Like I think maybe, you know, it might be good to kind of talk a little bit about the origins of this club. Like maybe Jeff, Dana, you guys want to talk about how this kind of how the topic sort of coalesced for you guys, just looking at it from a historical perspective?
Yeah, totally. We had a really interesting conversation about how to kind of, you know, title this club. We're talking about the Iberian Peninsula. We're talking about Lusitania. And I think when people think about Lusitania, right, the first thing that comes into their mind is the ship, right? The sinking of the Lusitania in May of, you know, 2015 or of 1915. And I think Jeff was the one that found this really fascinating story that actually linked the Lusitania to the wine industry and the emergence of California wines, right?
The New World.
New World. By way of not just Hugh Lane, right? This art connoisseur and you know, his amazing wine collection that sank with the boat. In fact, they pulled up a bunch of I don't think we got into this in the club, but they actually in 2008 went in and they actually brought a bunch of bottles up from the Lusitania that were still sealed, and they opened them up and they were still apparently drinkable, which is remarkable. But yeah, we really tried to kind of tie this into Portugal and the sea, right? And the history of this region that is inexorably tied to trade, to the ocean. There's a reason that the Brits named Lusitania, and this is because Portugal is intrinsically tied to the sea, whether it's back to the Phoenicians, whether it's the Portuguese explorers, Magellan, Vasco da Gama, all these guys. So it seemed like a natural.
The last place you also would touch it before you're leaving to go west. It's kind of like your last chance.
There be dragons.
Yeah, exactly. Beyond there. Yeah. I mean, is it? It was also something that we've looked at, like Roman Empire type stuff, also like farther afield. Like we looked at beyond the Danube, if you remember back to the club, looking at wines of ancient Dacia. We looked at a number of these kind of regions that were sort of at the outskirts of, let's say, the Roman Empire. And I think that this was also something that, for me personally, I was very interested in, because I knew that there was this Roman element, but there's also this very native Celtic element, which we explored kind of in the Gallic kind of Gallo-Celtic world in I think it was Celtic Crossroads. But this was something, I mean, when I started looking into it, like there was this rich mythology, there was this really, which the Romans brought back. Anyways, it ended up being a really interesting club for me, just again from like a just a personal curiosity. And then of course, like I said, there's so many times that T and I were sitting there like, man, we should do some Portuguese wines. It was like, how are we going to do this? Like, what what is the ancient history of Portugal? How do we fit it in? So I think it really wrapped together nicely. Jeff, I think you were about to say something.
No, just agree with everything you guys said. I mean, it's these kinds of places on the periphery. I think it's for us, we sort of think, well, Lusitania is pretty obscure, or the Dalmatians are pretty obscure. These populations that were frontier populations, empires, tribes, whatever you want to call them. But in the Roman world, I mean, the Lusitanians were very well known. They were the fiercest tribe that the Romans fought in all of the Iberian Peninsula. Of all these tribes you can see on the map here, they're the ones that stood out, right, to the Romans. So I think it's kind of interesting. We're always kind of looking at these, we're looking at these populations through the prism of Roman historians, Greek historians, but what we do have access to from archaeology and other references, we're trying as much as we can with our club, right, to kind of give a lens into these people as well, like kind of how they view themselves and what they were, who they were, things like that. So it's always hard, right, as an ancient historian to do that, but that's kind of the idea, right? It's not just the Romans, which kind of come into every one of our clubs, for better or worse, sort of.
So much.
Because they're the ones, right, who won. So kind of at the end, so we get their history. But it's interesting. I mean, we didn't, those of us who studied this period and a lot of these places didn't know that much about the Lusitanians going into this club either. So it's always fun for us to,
in this case too, we'll
explore along with you all. Yeah.
In this case too, we'll even see a little later on how that history gets manipulated and becomes part of the national narrative and the idea of Portugal in the modern era too. So all the way up to the present. Very important and symbolic stuff.
Yeah, and of course, those of you who remember our Celtic Crossroads Club, it wasn't that long ago with France. There's a lot of similar themes there, right, with the Vercingetorix and this kind of idea of Celtic resistance to Roman imperialism. So I think we drew some of that out in the writing too.
So we could draw a direct comparison to our exploring of the frontiers of the empire, with also exploring the frontiers of some of the some of the wines of the world. I mean, some of these wines are definitely wines that and again, I'm speaking more broadly to other past clubs as well, but there's definitely a it's fun to see that kind of obviously history wine connection, where we're exploring wines here that most people have never heard of, don't know much about, and we're happy to be sharing them, the education side. And same thing again, like talking about Lusitanians. I mean, if you ask, the average kind of, maybe not a professional scholar, but history buff about what the Lusitanians, they probably wouldn't know that much, and that's okay. But that's just, I mean, maybe I'm patting myself on the back here.
Certainly, for me, it's out of my realm. I mean, and then you start looking, as you were saying earlier, about like the actual geography. You look at I mean, this is like the densest, right, per capita, right? Like I mean, the largest number of native varietals anywhere in the world,
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
Yeah, which is remarkable when you think about it, right?
Yeah,
It's,
and they also,
yeah.
I mean, the Portuguese consume a lot of wine. That was part of the reason for the so much. Everyone had their own home vineyards. There was a huge, like Dana's mentioned, like diversity of varieties. But it was not always just for export. There's lots of countries that we featured wines from where like the history was a little bit more commerce focused. Obviously, well, we can talk more about it towards the end when we get into the port there. But the English definitely were kind of the English and the Dutch were the main ones who came down and said, "Oh wow, there's actually a lot of amazing wine here."
Yeah.
The Portuguese are like, they're drinking it and they're like, "Okay, you want to buy this stuff? That's fine, right?" So, anyways, without getting too far ahead of ourselves, should we move on to wine number 2? Or did you?
Oh no. I was just gonna say, just a segment to the next wine, the Chibu, is that Portugal is a region where, for example, this next wine, which is a field blend, 20 red and white varieties, they don't even tell us. The winemaker doesn't even know what varieties are in his fields.
Yeah.
So
absolutely, no, absolutely. It's and so I mean this style of wine is a take on I would say an old style of wine called palhete. I don't speak Portuguese, but I believe it's palhete or palhete. I'm not sure exactly how it's pronounced, but this is a style of wine that is a blend of red and white varieties. I think there's the official designation means that it has to be of a certain percentage of red and white varieties, but you're seeing a lot of winemakers foregoing any kind of official designation for palhete and just basically making a red wine, or I should say a red and white mixed wine. It's not quite a rosé, obviously. This is definitely, definitely has some color to it, but it's but we do see some palhete wines I think like that are definitely more on the lighter color of the spectrum. So like, for example, like later on, again, not to get ahead of ourselves, but the Rosa d'Argiles, that lighter style, like that's, some of them can look even like darker rosés or even like, medium colored rosés. So that is a, kind of again, like talking about wines that are a little bit at the frontier of history and wine. Palhete was, again, it's a field blend, like as we can see here. And this is it's from vines located just around the village. And it is, again, like a pretty, I would say, rustic style of wine. Something just intended for probably in the past local consumption. This is the kind of wine that if someone was traveling to Portugal, 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago, they would have had something like this probably at some local restaurant. Oh, we had such great wine. It was so wonderful there. And then they come back to wherever they are and they try to find something similar. And it is nowhere to be found because it was not exported. And so just now, I would say in the last, 5 to 10 years, there's been this resurgence of these palhete style wines to be able to be, fun, fresh, lots of character, really interesting wines. Could be drunk a little bit with a chill, oftentimes designed to go with food. But yeah, and in this case, obviously, there's a wonderful goat on the front. It's
like one of my favorite labels ever.
It's a pretty great label. I mean, I'm gonna say, we're very objective in our wine sourcing. But sometimes there's things that do bump things into the this might be a
greatest of all time.
Contender category. So the goat helps, but yeah, I mean, as far as this is on the production side, like this is a project that is actually under a series of wines called Planet Mouraz. The winery is called Casa de Mouraz. You have a young pair of winemakers who are basically, they're kind of experimenting. They're like, let's try some new stuff. They only make a few hundred cases of this wine. They make other wines that are kind of a little bit more traditional, more straightforward, I should say. But this is a type of wine that, again, is for export. The export markets are finding that it's working really well. I'm not saying it's made for export, but so a fun wine, kind of a what's old is new again type of thing.
Totally.
Yeah. I find this is like the type of wine, maybe because I'm thinking of our time in Greece, but you go to like a taverna in Greece or one of these small restaurants, and basically they have a chalkboard and they tell you what they have for the day, and then they're like, this is our house red or house white, And
which here can kind of be like a scary term. You're like, ooh, that usually means that's like the cheapest bottom of the barrel, whatever. Whereas in some of these countries, like Portugal, Greece, where there's still a strong tradition of producing your own wine locally, usually that's what it means. Is like it's like wine that's made from winery locally. And it's it's made just for use in the restaurant.
Exactly.
So yeah, like you're saying, it's like humble. It's something that it might not have ever had a name in the past,
right?
As a cuvee. Whereas now they're like, oh yeah, we'll call it Chibu and
pretty good on and it's like a warm day in the Dow, which is like a very warm region, and they're like, cool, we have some like pure chicken or like some like chicken like sausages with potatoes, like new potatoes, which this wine would totally pair well with, with a slight chip.
Like Jeff, I've got a baby at home that's about 6 months older, almost to the day, and so I didn't get a chance to do the tasting. And so I'm trying these wines for the first time, and everything you're saying is resonating. It's so funny because you were saying, reminded you of, and I thought you were going to say Georgia, and I thought you were going to say Pheasant's Tears, I thought you were going to say Polyphonia, which is another 121 field blend of red and white grapes, and I'm like, this is right.
Oh yeah, exactly. It's the same. It's the same style. That's a great point.
And that's kind of the story that we're seeing a lot in wine producing countries is winemakers coming back to, again, like I wouldn't even necessarily say like only like it's the old ways or the ancient ways necessarily. It's just kind of maybe a I don't know, like kind of a heritage method where you just didn't know any better. Like if you had 100 200 years ago, if you had a field of what you would call black grapes or red grapes, you wouldn't know which varieties they were. And so, but they actually do have this ability to, when you have these co-plantations, it's kind of a hedge against things like a bad, like a late frost, which, if you have 100% Pinot Noir in a vineyard and you get like a frost at the wrong time, they're all dead. You're screwed. Whereas if you have 20 different varieties, they're ripening at slightly different times. Like in this case, they just pick everything all at once. It's literally everything. When they go out to pick, they probably take, I don't know exactly how they sample, but they'll probably take an average and say, this is probably, some of those are going to be underripe and that's fine. Some of those are going to be overripe and that's fine. And then they just try to hit that sweet spot in the middle. What you're seeing, again, that's like what they would have done by necessity. I like to think if I go back, 1,000, 2,000 years and you talk to a vineyard manager and you say, hey, don't you wish you knew what all those vines were? They'd say yes. Like I would absolutely pick some to be, a monoculture here for certain reasons. But no, I mean, this unintentionally, I would say sometimes works very much to the favor where the vines can kind of support each other into these, what I think is actually a pretty complex wine. There's lots of like spices and kind of like roses and
wild strawberry,
red fruits. It's a fun wine.
I'm glad Dana mentioned Polyphonia because that's a great way to. That was the name of a wine in Georgia, but it's just this, symphony of different grapes coming together.
So definitely a fun wine that we're excited to have. It's kind of, this is the type of stuff that we like to drink. I mean, we like to drink everything, but I would say this is the kind of wine that excites us for its at the same time simplicity, but also complexity. That's like totally not helpful, but I would say like it's like maybe it's a humble wine that can give you a lot if you kind of look for it. So something where as far as Portuguese wines go, a fun one to share.
But what do you think of it, Jeff? I know it's
I don't have this one. I don't actually have this one open, T. So
okay.
Oh
no, it's
well, I think you'll enjoy it.
You'll enjoy it.
So
this one was the one of them had a plastic cap, right? One of them had a cork.
One of them has a screw cap. And then one of them
I didn't want a Corvan. I didn't want a Corvan. The one with the. I didn't want to bust my Corvan on that thing. So.
Got it.
Okay, fair enough. Yeah.
Fair.
Moving right along. Oh yeah, Jeff, you want to say a couple words about?
So we just wanted to. I mean, we could talk all day. We could have done. We realized very quickly when we got in this club, we could easily have done just wines of Viriathus, this fascinating hero on the Lusitanian side of the Roman Lusitanian conflict. But we did highlight his. We highlighted him a little bit in page 2 of the write-up and in one of the sidebars there, but he's sort of akin to the like Vercingetorix type guy that we saw in the Celtic Crossroads Club, where he in this case was a shepherd who just sort of rose up in popularity and fame by participating in raids on the Romans. And then, I mean, there's kind of a detailed history, but for a while, the Romans had a commander who was sympathetic to the Lusitanians, was fair with them. And then changing of the guard, they ended up with a brutal guy named Galba who betrayed the Lusitanians a couple of times and actually murdered an entire segment of their population by tricking them, cornering them. So this guy Viriathus got a lot of sympathy and yeah, just became a kind of a national hero in the sense to the Lusitanians. He himself was actually betrayed by three of his best friends, sadly, who betrayed him to the Romans. And then they didn't, the Romans, there's a lot of stories like this in Roman history where these guys were expected to be rewarded for betraying Viriathus to the Romans, but then the Romans said, well, we don't reward traitors. So then they lost out. They didn't get payment for basically, you know, giving over Viriathus and murdering him in his sleep. So it's kind of, there's a lot of tales like that and kind of moralistic tales from Roman history, just like that story. But so just the map, we love putting some maps in just to help you visualize a little bit. I mean, this is quite detailed, but it kind of gives you a sense of what Lusitanian territory looked like here. And then the Romans, as if you go through the write-up, you'll kind of see they were very fond of sort of administrative reorganization over time. Just, I mean, nothing, the Romans did a lot of things well, but nobody did sort of administration as well as they did, right? Just kind of administering a huge empire with a pretty small population, really based back in Rome itself. So this is where we are here. We have Hispania, Old Territory, like kind of farther Spain, and Hispania Territorior, nearer Spain, of which Saguntum was the capital. Dana and I actually spent about a week there trying to get Dana's luggage back, if I recall, Lufthansa. So yeah, Romans definitely had better logistics than Lufthansa does to this day. So it's pretty funny, but yeah. And then this yeah, so we'll talk a little bit in the next segment about the capital, what becomes the capital of the province of Lusitania once the Romans make that into a province. But what we're looking at right now is middle of the 2nd century BCE. So this is a period after the Romans defeat the Carthaginians and kind of are basically over time trying to consolidate control over the entire Iberian Peninsula. So this Viriathus, I think the date is either 140 or 139 BCE. He's murdered. But they don't actually take over Lusitania and control it fully until the reign of Augustus. So like 25 BCE, I think, is when they finally get control of them. So they're, like I said, they kind of look at them now and are like, oh, that's a pretty obscure tribe on the periphery of the Roman Empire. But you know, to Romanize, this was a fearsome population that was extremely hard to control. So with that thought, let's maybe go to the next wine. We had some fun with the title on this one as well. So if I recall, I don't know who's taking this wine, but
I think I'm this one. So the Terra del Terra, Alf. So this is from Alentejo in southern Portugal, 100% Alfocheiro. And this is a wine that's from probably one of the most productive regions, if you will, of Portugal, from the Tejo. In the south, it is a warm region, rolling hills. They kind of give you that little bit of the rolling hills, sort of like very, very minimalist motif on the top of the label there. So actually, from all of the photos I've seen and from accounts from friends and colleagues who have been there, it feels a lot like parts of California. That's the part that they're always telling me that, yeah, wow, it really felt like, you know, Central California in different ways. So, you know, you get the kind of idea of like a lot of sort of sun-soaked hills, if you will. But so in that area, you have a wide variety of grapes that are grown. Alfocheiro is a grape that I think, you know, in its best form, best forms like this, you have this lovely kind of interplay between what seems a little bit like it could be a little more like the fruity, floral sort of tones, and you also have a nice body to it, nice texture. I think this is a really lovely example of the grape and kind of what it can do. It's something that has a lot of accessibility. It's a wine that I think is it does really well on let's say like like buy the glass sort of something, just say, hey, we're talking about house, house wine. Like it has that approachability where if someone was saying I have a glass of red, literally this is the type of wine that I would just grab the bottle, wouldn't even think about it. There's not too much of this, too much of that. Again, very balanced wine typically is kind of the hallmark, if you will, of Alfocheiro. So again, the style, freshness, definitely some nice kind of like dark red fruits, bit of plum, black cherry sort of notes to it as well. But this is again a wine that's kind of made for this. So Terra del Terra, they have wines where they take Alfocheiro and they'll put it in more oak, or you'll see more longer aging. Personally, I don't think it really needs that. This is the grape again that from a region that you have a lot of sunshine, you have a lot of ripeness. If you start putting a lot more like age and sort of and oak at it, it's just going to kind of lose that vibrancy a little bit for me. So but again in general, this is I think a really great value wine, again just because we have the prices up there. That's something that Portugal is known for, is having wines that really kind of punch above their weight class, so to speak. So you have a wine that could be at a $15 price range from let's say a half a dozen other countries, that I would regularly say the Portuguese wine at that same price point is outperforming them. And that's something that we've seen come from Portugal over the last, I've been following Portuguese wine for maybe a good 10-12 years now, and there's been a lot of just recognition for that fact that I think the wines are still just they're really good value for the money. So
and I feel like we're moving actually towards what actually a lot of people would think of Portuguese wines. Most people, when they have Portuguese wines, it's from the Douro. It's a richer, fruitier, more oak style. And this is like, you're definitely gonna get more plum on this than the first two wines, the Chibu, especially. We'll have the next wine as well, which is a little bit more characteristic of a warmer Portuguese climate. And Alentejo is more inland, so as a result, it's gonna be a little warmer, a little bit more sandier, a little hotter, less like kind of that oceanic influence.
And with those climatic similarities and also kind of again referencing the California wine industry, we're seeing a lot of like Touriga Franca, Touriga Nacional being planted in California, which then has that sort of like symbiotic name recognition. It's like, oh my God, I tried this and it was fantastic. And tell me more about this varietal, right? And where's it from? Oh, let me try some Portuguese wine. And like people are making their first introduction through California.
I always tell people, if I suddenly found a bunch of old gold bricks in my backyard for whatever reason, I struck it rich and I'm going to go plant a vineyard, I would definitely be putting Portuguese grapes here in California. It's a shame how few there is relative to one, how well they do perform here. Two, how many Portuguese immigrants came to California, and I would say just three, just like how good the wines can really be. And so this just really the I think it's the future is definitely going to have more Spanish and Portuguese varieties as as things I would say open up here in California in terms of perspectives and like what you can plant and what you should plant and what people are educated to.
Yeah, and people are more adventurous and people trust the producer to produce.
And they're tired of California Tempranillo. So
or or just like we're all just planting Central Coast like Merlot or something. Not this.
But it's something that I don't know if there's any Alfocheiro in California.
I never heard of it.
There are other Portuguese varieties for sure. But it's definitely something that I think again when I taste this, like it has just, I mean, for me, there's like such a richness of fruit again for a wine that comes screw cap $15 or $16, whatever, and it's just something that I think it's all stainless steel. There's no oak on this wine. So again, something is it like maybe again like a wine that you're gonna lay down in the cellar for 10 years? No, it's not meant for that. It's absolutely not meant for that. It's meant for you. It's a Tuesday night and you have some friends coming by for a glass of wine. You don't even think about it. You just grab it, you crack it open.
Honestly, with July 4th coming up, I think this is a perfect wine for your July 4th barbecue.
It is good burgers wine, absolutely.
Yeah.
Pizza.
Yeah.
You know, Parma.
Yeah, it's something that I would say don't think too hard about it. And you know that's something that's not necessarily a you know, it's not to mean that there's not things to think about, but honestly, like my recommendation for it is just, you know, fill her up.
Yeah.
So, yep. Next slide there, Jeff. I think jumping into this is
yeah, we just wanted to just chat briefly. I mean, this is sort of a, I mean, from those, for the all four of us who haven't not been to Portugal, to sort of discovering just, I mean, kind of knowing that these cities and sites have an ancient history, but not knowing that much about it. This club was a lot of fun. So this is from the city of Mérida, or Mérida Augusta, which, as I mentioned earlier, was made the administrative capital of Lusitania once it became a province under Augustus, so 25 BCE. So this is actually in Spain, which is interesting. So the eastern frontier of the province of Lusitania is in the modern country of Spain. So this theater here and this city is, I think from what we were learning, is the most extensive, has the most extensive, or some of the most extensive Roman ruins in Spain, actually. So even more like when Dana and I were in Tarragona, ancient Tarraco. I mean, there's Roman stuff absolutely everywhere, from the aqueduct to the theater to the forum, everything there. So all of those things that are typical of the Roman cityscape are also found here in Mérida, Augusta. So another site for our wish list, ancient wines tour to ancient Lusitania. This is on it. Interesting also, the history of the city of Lisbon goes back beyond the Roman period, but there was a significant Roman city there as well, and Braga in the north of Portugal too. So some sites, we touch on that a little bit more in the write-up if you want to go and kind of explore that, but lots to see.
Comment.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Jeff. Yeah, if you're finishing out there, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
Oh, no worries. Go for it.
Yeah, so one comment just about, you mentioned Spain, and you know the Lusitanians were in what is modern day Spain as well. Like Lusitania, like it technically did like extend over, you know, the Spanish Portuguese border today, and there is a region of Spain down there that, you know, is technically a wine region. It doesn't produce a huge amount of wine that is exported. This is like down in
Extremadura. Yeah, we looked into getting wine from there, but it's pretty hard.
There's not a lot of producers, and they make a number of wines. Let's see, like a lot of the wines that were in the market from Extremadura, there were like fruit infused spritzers and like wine coolers and like wine and like the stuff that was used for like, you know, kind of like wine and vermouth cocktail kind of things. And so, you know, we opted to go all Portuguese, you know, for the selection that we had. But I'm sure there's wines on there that are fantastic that are just not exported. And also, you know, or there's ones that are exported that we just haven't found yet.
I'm not seeing any complaints in the chat. So
Yeah. No wine spritzers on. All right. Well.
Yeah, when we did have a beat on a wine that I think was Touriga Nacional, but it was not. It's no longer imported by the importer we were going to work with. So we initially, but that would have been cool to have that wine, again, a Spanish wine in the club as well to highlight that connection. But
the other thing I would add
for Portugal too. So
the other thing I would add is that just Lusitanian food, which is very particular. And it kind of has this like Provence style influence, where it's like Spanish, Portuguese, but with this like a little bit more Mediterranean and like a little bit of nowadays French influence as well. So, and we threw some recipes in there in our write-ups for you to look up. So
I would say some Portuguese named dishes. Not the full recipes themselves.
But Portuguese named dishes that you can just look up. Yeah. It's yeah, really interesting.
But if you need any recipe recommendations, we're happy to vet some for you and send some to you. So you can always send us a request for if you're looking for something specific.
And send us your pictures if you actually do a pairing. You make a meal, by all means. You know, it might end up on our website.
Well, let's move on to the next wine there, Jeff. Number 4. Dana, I think, did you want to tackle this?
I can say a couple words about this one. And again, I'm kind of catching up, so you guys can jump in on it. We're gonna be moving to another region in Portugal. We're going to
same region.
Oh, yeah, we were also in Alentejo. Okay. Famous for its cork production, right? Right.
Yep, exactly. Yeah, it's actually more famous for cork than wine,
which was really
historically. Yeah.
And I guess similarly, right, the story of Herdade do Mouchao gets its start similarly, like around 1910, right? As vines are planted, and like I think it's around 1945. Bulk wines are being produced similar to maybe the styles, something similar to what we tried earlier with the Chibu. But it's around 1950 actually, that 1954 that the harvest kind of puts this Herdade de Mouchao and the family that runs it on the map. So they start getting some local recognition. This is a red blend that is a couple of different varietals. It's Alicante Bouschet, which is actually about half of the property. And as we're talking about this area, T, you were saying a couple of words, and Ryan, you were about this region, right? The heat, but also, right, we've got these like deep alluvial soils that have lots of really good drainage that are perfect for Alicante Bouschet. So half the property is Alicante Bouschet, which is one of the varietals. Also Aragonés, Trincadeira, and Castelao are 3 other varietals that go into this blend. It's again 100% just traditional methods that go into the production of this wine. The winery itself is this beautiful adobe building with these high ceilings and wooden rafters, and there are these 9 stone troughs that go across the entire thing. I was trying to find pictures of this, but lagares, yeah,
the squares, stone squares,
yeah. And they're pressed, right? Everything is hand picked and foot trodden, and actually there's some whole cluster maceration that happens during this time too, right? Which gives a lot of the reds a little bit of vibrancy, a little bit of lightness to it. And then basket pressed, right? Traditionally basket pressed after that too. So even though there's a lot of innovation that's taking place, like I'm talking about, traditional methods reign and result in a really beautiful wine. This particular blend is aged in oak for about 12 months and then sits in the bottle for another 6. I think it's a combination of French and Portuguese. And it is pretty. I'm trying it for the first time, and absolutely lovely. What else?
What I like, this is probably one of the more classic Portuguese wines that we've featured in the club, but there's still good acidity on it. I'm tasting that. Yeah, it's not like overly oaked or overly extracted, which can happen in a lot of other Portuguese wines.
Yeah, like that oak presence is there, but it adds this nice kind of like almost like a dark chocolate fudgy sweetness to it alongside all that fruit, and it really brings it together. And I think they Dana, you mentioned that they have Alicante Bouschet, like that's we'll talk about a little bit more about Alicante Bouschet with the next wine, the special offer wine. It's a kind of which will be even more kind of interesting to talk about once you see the color of the next wine. But Alicante Bouschet is a dark red grape. It's a Teinturier grape, which means that the juice is also red.
Like Saperavi.
The flesh is red.
The flesh is red. This is a grape that was not native to Portugal, but was planted in the early 20th century is really when it landed from France originally. And it's basically not found in France at all anymore. It took off in southern Iberia, in Lusitania, and but primarily in Portugal. You see it used. And it gives that, that kind of like that dark sort of, that dark, spicy fruit. And so it's a really interesting grape that holds its acidity very well in hot places. So it was originally from like the south of France or places like that. But yeah, now it is much more recognized as a Portuguese variety. So and Herdade do Mouchao they're one of the pioneers of that variety. They championed it. They planted their flag when they made that transition, like you mentioned, when they started getting recognition, they kind of were just like growing grapes and cork, and I think they were also doing like wool production and other orchard fruit stuff too. And then they started getting recognition for the wines, and then shifted to becoming a wine producing estate.
Right. First label.
First
54.
Exactly. When they're like, oh, we're gonna make this estate wine, whereas previously they would sell the grapes. And so you see that transition a lot in historical estates where they may have origins in other industries, or doing totally different things, but then they'll grow some grapes and then they'll make a little bit of wine, and then all of a sudden they're going, wait, we should focus on this, and they sort of push everything else to the side and start producing almost exclusively wine. I mean, you see this a lot in Italy too, where you might have had farms that turn into farms with olives and grapes, and then they're just olives and grapes, and then they're just grapes, at a certain point. So these kind of like transitions tend to happen.
Yeah, and I think this farm, they start out as basically just a farm. They had pigs, they had sheep, they had olives, and then they grew some vines, and they increasingly, they still have all of those, but they're increasingly transitioning to vineyards.
I think there's about 10 years in there too, after like the revolution in 74, where the land was taken back by the government and it was laid fallow for like 10 years. Wow. They had to come back in the 80s and actually replant and get everything going again. And that was also the handoff to the next generation, the kids and stuff.
I mean, I'm definitely not an expert on like modern Portuguese history by any means, but I know from talking to Portuguese wine producers in the past is that the Salazar years, like these types of difficult periods, I should say, in Portugal's history. As again, this is coming from the winemakers who are telling me this, so I didn't know their politics entirely, but that's part of the reason why Portuguese wine, the prices were still relatively low when everything else was hitting the kind of global market in the 90s and in the 90s and the 2000s. Everything else had been kind of landing elsewhere in the EU and around the world, whereas Portuguese wines, they were still kind of coming out from this sort of dark period, as it was described to me, where there wasn't a lot of infrastructure for marketing, there wasn't a lot of infrastructure for export outside of Porto. In the Douro region, as T mentioned earlier, the Douro region is kind of like north central Portugal, follows the Douro River. That's where port is produced. The English and the Dutch, as I mentioned in the beginning of the talk, where they really landed a lot of money into that area, but a lot of it, went straight from that river, down the river to the port on the ocean and out to the rest of the world. And so, a lot of that money left Portugal. And basically the rest of the wineries in the rest of the country and the rest of these table wines were not exported and recognized for many, many years. So really in the last like 20 years, Portuguese table wines have had this renaissance. A lot of people are probably familiar with Mouchao, which was a sweet Portuguese wine that came in these kind of very iconic bottles. Mateus is how it's spelled. Mouchao, if you ask anybody who was drinking relatively inexpensive sweet wines in like the 80s and the 90s, a little while back, they probably knew Mouchao, but so it didn't have a great reputation. So again, these estates like Herdade del Mouchao, these were sort of at the forefront of repopularizing, or I should say, maybe reintroducing table wines to the market outside of Portugal, Portuguese table wine. So really, I mean, this is a producer that has done a lot of work for Portugal as a brand. So happy to support them. And again, the wines, like we're saying, it's just they're really nice and like soft, easy, rich.
Guys, can you talk a little bit about obviously the date on this 2018, so we're drinking 2024. It tastes, I mean, it both looks and tastes like a slightly older wine. It's got all those characteristics. Is the wine that you normally would age a bit before releasing, or take it
definitely
5 years after you get it rather than fresh? Or can you talk a little bit about that? Or
so I mean, as Dana mentioned, 12 months in oak and then 6 months in bottle. But again, like you'll have instances where producers hold back lots, lots meaning like a whole entire production run of wine, for various reasons. Sometimes they just wanted to sell through the older wine. Sometimes, if they're just sitting on hundreds and hundreds of cases of something, they're not going to sell to the distributor the 2021 yet, or 2020 or 2021 yet, if they haven't finished through the export, the allotment of export wines for 2019. Does that mean that the wines are like, oh no, they're like, peaking and they're going down? Like, no, not at all. This is definitely a wine that has enough structure to be able to be aged. This is 2019, so aged longer than, let's say, like what the winemaker released it with, but that's just kind of like what was in their, let's say, maybe like original intention or original recipe. I would guarantee that you could find like these wines on the shelves with this age, with 2019 in Portugal and other places. So the drinking window for this wine, you could easily lie this wine down for another 3, 4, 5, 6 years. It really is has enough structure to do that. It's already I think in a nice,
it's in a great spot. That's why I asked, because to me it has that kind of, it's balanced out some of that kind of fresh fruit with a little bit of like secondary characteristics. I like it a lot, actually.
There's definitely some of that kind of like secondary kind of like tobacco-y kind of stuff that I'm getting.
Soft tannins in there.
It's definitely softened up. If you tasted this wine 2, 3 years ago, or when it was just released, it would be grippier. It would have more of that oak vanilla punch to it. Absolutely. I'm not somebody who like really wants a ton of oak in my in my wines. I like to have that oak soften and integrate. So that's just a complaint I have about certain like Riojas and things like that, is that I think they release them a little bit too young. They could do with a few extra years like this in this case. And I think part of that is the decision of the winery to sell the wines, and some of it is the importer to select the wines, and some of it is the distributor to distribute the wines locally here in our market. So there's kind of these like different checkpoints of palate that every wine pretty much goes through from one way or the other, again, from producer to importer to distributor, and then to retailer too. Actually, there's 4 different, we're as the retailer. So you actually have every wine kind of going through this sort of gauntlet of like somebody saying, is it ready? Is it good enough? Does it taste good? Again, this is assuming that everybody's doing their, doing their job properly, and actually, making sure to be, diligent with their selections. But yeah, so I think, I totally agree with you, Jeff. I think this wine's in like a really nice place. It's showing really well right now. Not necessarily something you need to lie down for any reason,
but you could.
But you absolutely could.
And I would say like the regions in Portugal that you can really lie down are Douro and Alentejo, because if you look at the color of this wine, it's probably one of the darker colors of the wines we have, and one that can easily be aged. The other wines we've had thus far, I would say, are wines that are meant to be drunk younger and not age. And because this region, there's oak on it, it's a little bit more fruity. So when you age it, a fruitier wine can age well, because as a result, like the fruit characteristics, if you don't like overly fruity wines, they'll mellow out, and then you get that tertiary, secondary flavor of mushroom and tobacco, earthy stuff. So
or just more of like a softening.
Yeah, exactly.
I feel like it'd be so good with like gamey meat, right?
Yeah.
Something with a little bit of like, like a gamey venison or like
Lamb.
Dana, do you want to talk about a little bit about just the mythology? This is a whole topic again, that we could have written a club.
This is great
topic, but it's really interesting stuff.
Yeah, totally. And, as we kind of get away from talking about, Roman authors, a lot of what we know actually about Lusitanian mythology come from actual inscriptions, right? That were Gallic inscriptions, Gallic Celtic inscriptions, and the cross-pollination of these different gods that have connections, right, to what we see in Gaul, what we see in the Britons, what we see across the sort of pan-Celtic world, if we want to put it that way, are really interesting. There's a lot of like syncretism with the Roman arrival, a lot of, you have this god, that's basically right. That's basically like our god, right? So Bandua was a warrior god. And they're like, okay, well, Romans are like, oh, well, this is very similar to Mars or the Greek Ares. This there's a pantheon of gods that kind of similar to the Greek pantheon and the Roman pantheon exist almost as like the primary colors of the universe, and that in between these spaces, right, certain events, whether it's like coming to womanhood or a specific thing like horses, right, there's a god that inhabits that space, some combination thereof that explains the world and the universe. And of course, being Celtic tradition, there's a lot of ties to mountains, to streams, to the natural world. So we see gods like Nabia, who's worshipped in different places in different ways across the Iberian Peninsula, associated with springs. The Romans thought she was very similar to like the goddess Diana. And they also changed a bunch of gods too. There are these Berberus and Endovilicus. We actually see that those gods, Endovilicus particularly, the name has this tie to like the most black. Probably a chthonic god associated, right, with the other world and the underworld and so forth. But he's kind of popularized and turned into quite a different creature associated with like prophecy and healing in the Roman world. So we have a photo of Lucis up here, and actually in a lot of ways, he is the most interesting of the quote unquote Lusitanian gods. We get into this in more depth in the club, but the story is that Lucis is supposed to be the son of Bacchus, and of course that right is Bacchus, Dionysus, our god of wine and grapes, who we hold so dear. And he has this really important role that he plays in, particularly in Portuguese national mythology, as being the founder of ancient Lusitania and all of its inhabitants. The problem is that this reference really comes from, the story of Lucis and his sort of like propagation is not coming from ancient Rome. It's not coming from any, inscriptions. It's actually coming from a fairly late text by Luis Vaz de Camões in 1572, who's writing about this book called the Lusíads, where it's very similar to the Odyssey, except instead of like starring Odysseus, it actually has Vasco da Gama sort of like standing in for him, and it kind of explains this like national origin story, and that's actually pinned to the one reference that we do have from antiquity, which is from Pliny the Elder, right? So in his Naturalis Historia, and Jeff, you can correct me on this, but there's a pretty solid consensus that there's a misinterpretation of the word lusus, which in this reference, Pliny is talking about Lucis Dionysia, like or Bacchus, right? The games of Bacchus, and the misinterpretation is Lucis of Bacchus, meaning his son. And instead of just the simple word for games, this interpretation creates a whole new god. So that's pretty wild, right? And also conveniently fits into the narrative of the Portuguese Empire and the expansion, and very conveniently overlooks all of the Roman history and the Umayyad and Abbasid history and everything that came before it too. So whether or not that was an honest mistake by Franciscan friars, or whether it kind of was like, we're gonna just kind of tie to this thing, right? We'll leave that to you to decide. But yeah, so you can speak to the Latin, obviously, Jeff. I won't step on.
Oh, you're right. I mean, we talked about it when we were kind of looking over the write-up. That's how I read it too. It was for games is it was kind of taken like you said. I didn't dig into it enough to know whether that was intentional or accidental, but whatever it was, it had the implication that now we have this sort of god that's son of Bacchus, the god Lucis. It's really interesting.
Well, shall we move on to some of the bonus wines here, Jeff?
Yeah.
Special offer. T, you want to jump in
absolutely.
and do a quick run through the special offer?
Yeah, absolutely. The first one, also from Alentejo, just like the previous one. And it's Alicante Bouschet. And as Ryan mentioned, this is one of the few Tenuter grapes, which is a red flesh grape. It's called a rosé, but it's actually made in a white wine style. So because the flesh is red, when they press it, of course, the juice is going to be red. Unlike, say, if you press a Chardonnay or a Sauvignon Blanc, because the flesh would be translucent, you're going to get a white wine. So it's called rosé, but it's basically the equivalent of what the French would say blanc de noir, white of red. And what's really interesting about this wine is that it's done in stainless steel, and also because usually Alicante Bouschet is used as a blending grape, and the reason they do that is to give, because the flesh is red, it gives color to other grapes. So, for example, Alicante Bouschet is grown in the Finger Lakes in the U.S. because, well, we'll see with climate change, they probably don't need it as much anymore, but they grow Alicante Bouschet in the Finger Lakes because they can add it to Pinot Noir or a Cab or something. And because it's so cold up in the Finger Lakes, the Alicante Bouschet will give a darker color to and also some acidity, as Ryan mentioned, to the wine. So it's always used as a blending grape. It's very difficult to find an Alicante Bouschet on its own, like a pure, and especially, and then also done in a Blanc de Noir, like a white wine style. It's pretty rare.
This is the first I've ever. This is actually the lightest Alicante Bouschet I've ever seen in my entire life.
It kind of defies the description, right?
Yeah.
It's like supposed to be the opposite.
If this was your first Alicante Bouschet, every one you had for this would confuse the hell out of you, because they would all be, they're typically dark, dark purpley kind of color, like they're like teeth staining wines typically when you have a heavy either like a large predominance of Alicante Bouschet or 100% Alicante Bouschet, which I've had those that they're just like, they can be really intense. So I mean, like, it's a beautiful wine. I mean, this wine struck us when we saw it. We're like, wow, this is a gorgeous color. I mean, this is also a wine that it was kind of fell in the same sort of realm as the Chibu, in that it a little bit lighter red, something you could chill, something you could you could bring again with a little bit of chill. There's a lot of freshness to it. And so, we kind of had to pick between the two, and for the club, and then we said, nah, we'll get both. And so this happens all the time when we're looking at wines for the club. But yeah, it's definitely a very unique wine,
and it's so unique, and it's because Alentejo is a DLC. This wine was so out of the ordinary that they're not allowed to even put the vintage on it. It's actually a 2022 vintage. You wouldn't know that because it's not labeled on the bottle. There's a small lot number on the back of the on the back of the bottle that will let you know it's 2022. So we weren't sure like whether we should say 2022 and break the Portuguese laws or not, but it is 2022. Like,
they can come chase me down.
But this is what happens when you try to do cool stuff that breaks the DLC rules. You see that in France a lot.
You run afoul of the local authorities, the local labeling authorities, and again, I mean, and this is the style of wine that's like, sometimes you probably would have made wines like this in the past, and there wasn't a DOC or anything like regulating body. You just say, this is just the kind of wine I make. So bureaucracy has its benefits and its drawbacks. I would say, in terms of the experimentation, the progress of wine. Sometimes creating these boxes limits really, really, really tasty wines from being made.
I mean, as Ryan mentioned, it's like a good and bad, right? Like, in some ways it maintains stylistic, like Parmesan cheese, or like champagne should taste like champagne. Parmesan cheese there should be a process to make Parmesan cheese, but it kind of, that's good because it creates an economic product and a style that standardization. But then it also limits, on the other hand, like something cool and creativity, because like
you got to make rules to break them too.
Yeah, exactly.
Very good point. And I mean, so like this is a wine that I think actually, like, just kind of like sum it up. I mean, the grape was brought to Portugal for economic reasons. For like, okay, we need a dark fruited, like grape that's going to do well in the heat. And the DOC was established for economic reasons, to establish levels of ripeness and certain, these types of measures, for wine. But then you have someone who's basically turning all that on its head. And, like you said, you got to make rules to break them. And, taking the practical and the, again, in some cases just done for, it seems like a good way to make money or whatever, and turning into something that's kind of more on the artistic spectrum. And I think that's really what wine's all about, is kind of, bridging that gap about like things you have to do, things you should do, and things you want to do. Mm-hmm. And, good wines, I think they kind of skirt that boundary between all three of those things. Mm-hmm. So it's definitely it's a very unique wine. You will probably not ever taste a Alicante Bouschet that's like this ever again.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, especially I've never had it, so yeah.
Very cool.
And Ryan has been to multiple wines of Portugal tasting events.
No, there's nothing like this. I mean, I would have been very impressed if somebody had bought this. So I mean, the wines of, just as a quick aside, the wines of Portugal is a big trade tasting that they put on, and SF, LA, New York. They've been trying really hard to raise the profile and the education level of wine buyers, and just people who work for like big grocery stores, things like that, to be able to get even 1 or 2 Portuguese wines in. So I would say that's kind of like the landing point for a lot of Portuguese wines, is like, okay, they're looking for stuff to stock shelves with, not necessarily things that are always, maybe, shall we say, like intellectually stimulating, but that is kind of like what paves the way for wines like this to hit the market. Once someone can say, okay, no, I can sell a Portuguese wine, like I can put this in my shelves and be able to have a customer who can appreciate it. So anyways, Wines of Portugal is this big trade tasting that you kind of get a who's who and a what's what and a who's doing what of all the producers of Portugal, kind of all at once. And lots of countries and regions do this, but I don't know, Wines of Portugal was always one that I went to, because it was so fascinating to see, like, unlike any other country, how much it would change year to year. And from one year to the next year, you would see a marked change in the types of wines that were being offered and shown, and types of qualities. So really interesting stuff. It's a developing country. We talk about this all the time with Eastern Europe and Greece. I feel like I'm a broken record talking about where the trajectory of these countries is going in the wine industry, but it is very exciting to see this new generation of Portuguese winemakers make very, very interesting, fun wines like this. Shall we move onwards in the wines, but maybe do a more kind of classic style of wines here? The next wine here.
And also a first for us, right?
For a dessert wine. Yeah, absolutely.
Is this the first dessert wine ever?
Yes, first ever dessert wine. Yep.
I know we've worked with some dessert wines in some of our events. We've had like Quinta, I think.
And then the Riesling, but not for well, I guess not for.
I feel like we might have had one early on. I could be wrong. I feel like we might have had one sweet wine.
So, well, whether it's new or not, it's new to us. And this is a Tawny port from a producer called Conceito. And this is again, like probably the most famous wine of Portugal is port, obviously. And so you have an entire market that knows kind of what port is. Okay, it's a sweet, kind of heavier red. And I wanted to find a port that had that classic character to it, but also was from a smaller producer. This is definitely from a much smaller producer than like some of your big one, your Dows, your Grahams, your Lindemans, these producers that you see everywhere. And again, they can make great wines, but I think it's a region where there's a bit of an old boys club. We're talking old money here. We're talking old money for the first DOC in Europe. I believe officially, again, they argue about this, but I believe the first official, I should say, appellation in Europe was the Douro, was port. They were trying to stake their claim to, this is a special region to make special wines for in a special way. earlier than almost anybody. And so this is, again, like that's where you have a lot of entrenched beliefs about what port should be, what it could be, how it's made, how it's farmed. And so this is a producer that, like I said, smaller producer, I would say more, much more sustainable farming practices, organic farming practices in many cases. The blend here is a traditional port blend. You have Aragonés, which is Tempranillo, actually, but the main grapes being Touriga Nacional, Touriga Franca, Tinto, and then there's a number of other grapes that go into the blend, but those are kind of the main ones, plus Aragonés. But yeah, this is the Tawny port. A lot of people think of like, oh, ruby port's kind of red and Tawny's kind of brown. You can kind of see by the color, this is actually still like in the nice kind of like a dark deep red with a little bit of kind of bricking color to the edges. Yeah, garnet sort of color. So it's not a Tawny port that's going to show a lot of that kind of that sort of like, you know, I don't know, more I would say like more like musty kind of earthy sort of tones. You're still gonna get that nice kind of like nutty edge to it, absolutely. But it's just it's a really nice balance in between two worlds. We kind of couldn't decide between like a Tawny or a ruby what we wanted to taste, like sample from some of our vendors. And so this one actually came out really nicely because it is a really nice ruby port for a Tawny lover, and it's a really nice Tawny port for a ruby lover. So it's again, like, and also the style here is balanced. It's not aiming to be like thick and heavy on the palate. It's something that actually still has freshness to it. Which again, if you've had certain ports, sometimes they can be cloyingly sweet.
Oh yeah, syrupy.
Yeah, syrupy. I mean, like this drinks like a wine that happens to be a port, as opposed to, you know, like a port that's kind of like, oh yeah, it also is a wine. And that's kind of like a sort of silly way to say that, like it still has acidity, it still has brightness and freshness. The ABV, it is fortified, so you know the ABV is 18.5, I think, 19.5, yeah. So which is pretty, like I'd say, pretty standard, but honestly, it doesn't have that same kind of like sometimes harsh burn you can get with ports that haven't aged a very long time,
or that are industrially produced,
or that are like produced at a very, very large scale. Yeah, absolutely. But you know, it was something we wanted to enter into the, you know, the Ancient Wine Guys catalog, if you will, of wines that we've worked with. As you know, if we're going to work with the port, it's something I think that should be accessible. This doesn't need to be something that is you know, only for your wood paneled study with like a cigar, and it has to be, you know, 35 years old and sort of thing. No, this is a port that you can drink. You can open the bottle and you can drink it on a little bit on a Tuesday night, put the cork back in it, come back on Wednesday night or maybe Thursday night. You know, if you have a busy Wednesday, it's going to be totally fine. Come back, you know what, next Wednesday, maybe the Wednesday after that. This is what's lovely about port, is that it doesn't die. You can open the bottle and you can kind of just drink it at your leisure. Now, would I want to open the bottle and wait 3 years to drink it? No, I would probably, and personally, I would rather consume it a little bit sooner. But like, that's just what I love about port and Madeira as well. I think Madeira is a whole nother topic that we'll definitely get into from a historical perspective at some point.
I will say that we did have a particular port year for a certain gentleman who's on this call for his 40th birthday, which was really exceptional.
That was one of the best ports ever.
We did a port and a Madeira that year, but yeah, that was 77 is one of the great years for port. So shouldn't reveal your age, but yeah, that was.
We did have a 77 port and Madeira for Jeff's 40th birthday. It was, they were both magical.
We're gonna have to find some for 50. I mean, that's gonna be the other thing.
Right? Yeah, but that's like 10 years from now, right, Dana?
Oh yeah, 10 years for sure. Yeah.
Well,
almost as good as that. Speaking of birth year wines, Dana, when you got that pallet of Dow for your birthday, what was that? Your birth year wine was on sale at Vintage Berkeley. It was like closeout. It was like $3.
Oh, yeah, the 1980. Yeah, actually.
So yeah.
So actually, that's actually a really good point, Jeff. Something that I want to mention.
Yeah, ageability.
As we're kind of wrapping up here.
Yeah,
is that on the market, you will find Portuguese wines that are what seem like absurdly old for the price. So you will see wines. I regularly see this out in wine shops, like a 1995 or a 1985 or a 1992, just like a table red wine out in the market for like $30 or $45, and you're thinking, of course, what's wrong with this wine? It's
Yeah.
probably your first inclination. A lot of Portuguese producers have deep cellars. And I mean that both like figuratively and literally, where some of them go deep into the earth and some of them have, you know, dozens and dozens of back vintages going back, you know, generations. You know, like sometimes it's their grandfather's wine. They're like, yeah, he made a lot of wine. We didn't know what to do with it, so we just kind of left it. And a lot of these producers now who are, for the first time in some cases, coming into contact with distributors, importers from the United States or other parts of Europe, and the distributor comes and he's, you know, they're buying the new wines, and then they're like, hey, yeah, like, can I see your cellar? And they're like, oh yeah, I've got all these old wines from the 70s, 80s, 90s in there. And they're like, what are you gonna do with them? They're like, I don't know. I'm like, can we buy them? Like, oh yeah, I guess sure, you know, and they're giving, and so like, yeah, if you want them. And I would say in some cases the wines are fantastic. In some cases the wines are definitely old and more of a curiosity,
An adventure.
An adventure, like. Yeah. Something, you know, for us as historians, you know, we don't mind a little bit of like dusty, dirty sort of stuff, a little dirt under the fingernails, if you will, of a wine. But I would say it's something to keep an eye out for. If you're going to some of those wine shops, you know, in your town, it might be kind of like the, the wine shops that tends to get some interesting stuff. Again, this is not going to be the grocery store. They're not going to do it. It's not going to be Costco. They're not going to find these wines. But you know, the grocery stores that are you know, talking to good distributors that have, you know, smaller lots, you will definitely at some point see one of these where it's like, oh, 2001. Like, okay, it's just a dry red wine from 2001. You know, what's it like? Definitely give it a shot if you find one. Again, it could be something where you're like, oh wow, it's like, you know, a dark orangey brown color, and you know, it smells like truffles and toasted oranges. I mean, does it smell like anything like this? No, absolutely not. But it could be really, really fun.
Yeah. And
also, again, not break the bank. Most times, if you're getting something from the 90s from any other Mediterranean country, you're dropping over at least $100. You know,
absolute worst case scenario, you have a nice salad dressing, right?
So there you go. Yeah, probably not for two. Yeah, what I hear you saying is like in this area, license to hunt. Right?
Yes, I would say license to hunt. Yeah, I mean license to hunt because of the price, and also because of a lot of times. Currently, there's a lot of producers who have been releasing wines, and it's not about like that they've been getting fleeced and they don't know what they have. It's more about they're just like, I just want to clear space in my cellar. And so, yeah, sure. Why don't you buy my, like, you know, my 88, 89, 90, 91, 92. And you know, there's maybe 20 cases of each one or something like that hit the market, and not everyone's going to buy it, but you do definitely see it out there. It's one of the few countries where we'll see stuff that's like, what, like a 1999 Arinto from a small producer in northern Portugal, and we'll try it, and it's amazing, you know, like strange tangy golden liquid that comes out, and it's, you know, it's unlike anything else you can try. So, you know, it's kind of a fun area to explore wine wise, and there's a lot of joy to be had in the glass from a lot of different Portuguese wines. There's a lot of diversity there.
Yeah, I remember reading Michael Broadbent's books and, like, you know, his stories of opening up crypts in England and, like, you know, finding these amazing wines and verticals in the 80s that will never be had again. And, you know, and yeah, I mean, it's important to know where we can still have an adventure, where we can seek out. Exciting stuff.
And I would just say for port, the reason it can, as Ryan mentioned, it can last is that you're taking grapes, you're pressing them, and then you're stopping fermentation by adding a brandy. Could be brandy, or it could be just a neutral spirit, depending on where you're getting it from. This is from a brandy, and that stops fermentation, so it keeps that. So it stops fermentation, so that's why you have the sugar level. What we really like about Tawny versus Ruby or LBV, which is late bottle vintage, is that it's Tawny ports, they don't top off the barrels. So as a result, there's air, and so the wine actually oxidizes. That's what gives it that kind of brownish, nutty quality, and that oxidative quality gives it a little bit more acidity to it in comparison to, like, you know, a Ruby, you know, or late bottle vintage, which it's going to have a deeper color, have a little bit more sweeter characteristic to it, and so that's where the nuttiness comes from.
So I'm gonna throw this out there as an idea right off the bat, and members, you guys can chime in as we wrap up here. And thank you again.
Yeah, feel free to start putting questions in the chat,
Yeah.
you know, as we're rounding up here. But go ahead, Dan.
No, totally. We'll open it up, but I'm thinking, right, and one thing that we're working on is making some of these back vintages, back clubs available for you guys to be able to go on the website, order what you want. We wouldn't send you 3 dessert wines normally, but I think doing like a Sweet Life club that would be like Tokai, Sauterne, Tawny Port, right? Something that like making some of these wines available for those of you who are so inclined and interested in this particular niche area.
Yeah, there's definitely some. I mean, the for some reason, you know, I mean, for obvious reasons, I would say because of the deliciousness, you know, of sweet wines. But almost every sweet wine has an like a very rich history.
Yeah.
I
mean,
mean,
the wines of kings, you know,
like Tokai,
Tokai
Tokai was Thomas Jefferson's favorite wine.
Yeah.
Because as you imagine, like, and for kings and in the winter, you can't get fruits and vegetables easily.
Yeah.
So, you know, imagine if you're cold, like a sweet dessert wine by the fire sounds amazing.
Yeah.
You know, like, yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, that's why it was the most expensive wines.
But it's not for everybody.
Yeah.
Totally understand that sweet wines aren't for everybody, but I totally agree that like maybe a focused you know, special offer pack of some sweet wines is definitely something in the works that
Especially
would
around the holidays, right? That
Yeah.
sort of like centers on that. I still have a bottle of Quinta that's probably about 2 years old and it's still tasting. Yeah. Starting to get there.
Well,
Anyway.
so I would say, I mean, as we said before, or many times before, thank you to all of you for joining us for the tasting. It's just a joy to be able to you know, dig a little deeper into some of these wines, into the content that we care so much about, and we hope you dive into when you have the time as well. And if you want to order anything additional of these wines, please just let us know. Send us an email, send us a text message, phone call, carrier pigeon, whatever works. The shipping is free for up to 9 additional bottles in California, Colorado, Oregon, Washington, and then $5 for every other area. $5 a bottle.
Might revise that to 8 actually, now that we're on quarterly, because we have the 4 bottle.
Oh, that's correct.
Bottle,
Yeah. So
sorry, I should have changed that, but yeah, just to fill up the case, if you're in
that's right, because we're on a four bottle club shipment, that does make sense. So, but yeah, if you have any questions, feel free to either unmute yourself or drop a question in the chat. As always, we love to just hear people's thoughts on the wines. And it looks like Eloise has a question.
Yeah.
Louise.
What are the prices on these other wines? I just got I got the price on the first one was $20.40, but I don't have the prices on the others.
So let me go back through the slides here. So we have this.
I didn't see those.
Oh yeah. So can you see it now? The Tawny Port.
No, the only slide I saw was the first one.
Oh, interesting, Eloise. Yeah, I wonder.
Did the other folks there? Did you guys see the other slides?
We can see the slides.
Okay, good. Jeff spent a lot of time.
Maybe your screen is frozen or something, Eloise.
I
got the first one though.
Okay, we can send you. We can
send you the list. Yeah. So
okay,
we
that's
can just
fine.
email you. We can email you this slideshow. Yeah.
That's weird because they've always come through all the times before.
Yeah, it's weird. Yeah.
And I'm not doing anything.
Not sure
I'm
what
not doing
happened there.
anything different. So.
Yeah, Louise, we can always jump on a you know, like a troubleshooting call if you ever need it.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and we can just send you the list of the wines, so no problem.
Yeah. Okay, that's fine.
Sorry about that.
But I got the first one.
Okay.
I got the first slide, but none of the others. So it's the first time that happened.
Yeah.
Oh, good.
And I'm using an iPad, but it's not. I've always used an iPad, so.
We appreciate you guys joining us as we kind of close out. We know this was kind of a respite from the debate. We were kind of thinking if anybody was going to like be on this call at all, or if like folks were going to have the, I figured, you know what, we're just going to drink wine and pretend that nothing's happening right now. Yeah, everybody needs a drink.
Yeah.
Yeah. I literally picked up Ryan. Ryan was coming back from New York.
Yeah, I just flew in from New York.
Yeah, and I picked him up. From the train station, drove him over there, and there was traffic, so we were listening to debate for 50 minutes in the car in traffic.
Fun stuff.
Fun
Yeah.
stuff. So.
Hey, Jamie, how'd you make this fatherhood thing look so easy? You didn't tell us. You didn't tell us what we were in for, buddy.
I'm gonna say you look pretty gray, man.
Oh, you know what? It's a filter, actually. They have this thing now. It's like, yeah.
The father
Speaking of which, guys, I do have to jump off because
Yeah, totally,
it's
Jeff.
needed for diaper changing and air conditioning. So I apologize,
100%.
but I'm the one managing the Zoom here. So
Yeah,
yeah,
I gotta bounce to do the same.
Please
and,
do
yeah.
reach out to us with additional questions. We can email you if you want to order any wine. We'd love to sell it to you. And obviously you're going to need something to tide you over until September to have a bigger gap with this quarterly model as well. So definitely reach out to us. We can fix you up. So
Yeah, absolutely.
Madeira.
yeah.
All right,
Yes, Madeira, absolutely. So I mean,
Okay.
I saw Wesley posted in the chat. You should 100% do a dessert sweet wine offering. I think it's definitely in the works.
Yeah.
I mean,
Done.
Sure.
Done.
Yeah.
Wesley. Yeah.
Madeira, little Sauterne, Tokai. I mean, that's enough right there in itself. But we'll definitely be thinking about it much more over the next
Think of a
coming
good
months.
name for
So
that.
the next club will be in September as we've moved to quarterly. Just so everybody knows. But we will definitely have some updates between now and then. And as always, do reach out if you need anything.
Yeah.
And we'll look forward to seeing you all again soon.
Yeah.
All right.
Thanks,
So,
everybody.
have a good night, everybody.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Thanks.
Okay.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Evan.
Take
Thank
care.
you, guys. See you.
Good night, everyone.